She's gone. I saw her take the blast. Nyland put his hand flat on the table and looked at the man across from him like the conversation was already finished. She went into the ravine. Nobody walks out of that. He poured himself a coffee, turned back to the maps, and didn't look toward the tree line again. That one decision, that one dismissal, would cost him everything before the sun came up. He left her for dead. She came back as something he never accounted for. Staff Sergeant Dana Reeves was 31 years old, 8 years in the Canadian Army, 3 deployments, 1 distinguished service commendation that her commanding officer had submitted twice before it was finally processed, and a reputation on the range that the men in her unit had spent the better part of 2 years explaining away. She'd heard every version, lucky grouping, different conditions. Let's see her do it under pressure. She had done it under pressure, repeatedly, in conditions that would have sent most of them home early, and the explanations had simply evolved rather than stopped. She was face down in frozen mud when the boots moved away from her. The grenade had caught her on the left side, close enough to throw her 6 feet into the drainage ditch that ran along the eastern perimeter of the compound. Her right shoulder had absorbed most of the landing. She knew immediately that something was wrong with it, the specific wrongness that doesn't announce itself with sharp pain, but instead with a dull, spreading weight, like the joint has simply resigned from the business of being a joint. She stayed still. That was the first thing. You stay still until you know the field. Sergeant Nyland's voice was maybe 30 feet away, maybe less. She's gone, he said. I watched her go over. That blast, she's gone. A pause. Then Lieutenant Breck. She recognized his voice by the flatness of it, the specific quality of a man running arithmetic. Breck always sounded like he was doing arithmetic. You're certain? I'm certain we can't hold the perimeter another 4 minutes. If we go back for her, we lose the whole thing. Another pause. She counted it. 1, 2, 3. Then we extract, Breck said. And that was it. She heard gear shifting, boots accelerating, the organized sound of her team becoming a sound that was moving away from her, and then the wind taking that sound, and then nothing but the compound's generator humming somewhere to the north, and her own breathing, which she was keeping slow and deliberate the way they had drilled it into her at Gagetown when she was 22 years old, and believed she could manage anything. She wasn't sure she could manage this. She was pretty sure no one could manage this. She was going to try anyway. She gave it a full 2 minutes before she moved. Training, pure training. The part of her that wanted to call out, that wanted to demand they come back, that wanted to be angry at the specific arithmetic in Breck's voice, that part got filed. Later. All of it later. Right now, she turned her head carefully and assessed. Right shoulder, compromised. Left knee functional but reluctant. Rifle still slung across her back. A C-15 Timberwolf with a thermal optic she'd calibrated herself before the mission. The stock had taken a hit from the fall, but when she pulled it around and ran the action, it cycled clean. 1 round chambered. She counted the magazine. 8 rounds remaining. Sidearm on her right hip with 1 spare. 2 grenades on her vest. A radio that was showing 1 bar of signal and a battery at 40%. She did the math the way they had trained her. Not in terms of survival, which was too large a question and would produce answers she didn't have time to process, but in terms of the next 5 minutes. What do I have? What do I need? What is the first step? The first step was getting out of the ditch. She used the rifle as a crutch and hated herself for it and did it anyway, dragging herself up the bank using her left arm and both legs with the right shoulder, doing as little as possible, which was still more than it wanted to. The mud was deep and cold, and the kind of cold that had passed through uncomfortable into something administrative, a fact about the environment rather than a sensation. She noted it, filed it. At the top of the bank, she stopped, pressed herself flat against a concrete abutment, and looked at the compound. Forward Operating Station Kessler, enemy designation. She'd spent 4 days on the satellite imagery before this mission. She knew the layout, the way she knew the layout of her grandmother's house in Truro, the one she'd grown up visiting every summer, where every room had a specific logic and the hallways all connected in ways that made sense once you understood the building's history. She knew Kessler the same way. She had studied it as a target. Now she studied it as a destination. This was the thing about Dana Reeves that her unit had never quite gotten right in their understanding of her. She didn't think about survival as a separate category from mission. Survival was what happened when you completed the objective. It was not a goal unto itself. It was a byproduct. The mission, the original mission, had been reconnaissance and extraction. Get inside, confirm the presence of the signals array, pull the hardware if accessible, get out. Breck had decided that mission was finished. Reeves had decided it wasn't. She started moving. The compound was 600 meters north. She covered it in 35 minutes of low crawling, using the tree line along the eastern edge for concealment, stopping every 4 minutes to check her back trail. Her shoulder made the crawling miserable in a way that she cataloged and set aside. The temperature was dropping. She estimated -12, maybe colder with wind. Her winter whites were intact, and her thermal signature in the blowing snow would be difficult to track. She had trained for this specific combination of conditions on a course outside Shiloh 2 winters ago. She had been the only woman on that course. She had finished second overall. She was 200 meters from the outer fence when she picked up the sentries. 2 of them, northeast corner, their shapes visible through her thermal optic as 2 heat signatures standing closer together each other than any patrol doctrine recommended. They were talking. They were not watching. Reeves spent 6 minutes in the dark studying their pattern, which was not a pattern so much as a collection of preferences, a tendency to drift left, to regroup, to check their phones with the specific hunched posture of people who believed nothing was coming. Nobody expected what had already been written off. She took the first sentry on the exhale, the way they had drilled it. The suppressed round was a whisper in the wind. He went down without a word. The second one turned, the instinct of a man who senses that something in the geometry of the world has shifted, and she was already cycling the action, and in the half-second he spent processing that instinct, she put the second round through the base of his helmet. 7 rounds, 2 grenades. She crossed the perimeter in a low crawl and pressed herself against the inside of the fence. Her shoulders screamed. She filed it. The compound interior matched the imagery almost perfectly, with one significant deviation. The vehicle pool had been expanded. There were 3 additional trucks parked against the south wall that hadn't appeared in any of the reconnaissance photos, which meant either the imagery was old or the compound had received reinforcements in the past 48 hours. She adjusted her model accordingly. In her experience, commanders who reinforced a position without updating their imagery requests were commanders who had recently become confident, and confidence in a defensive position was a specific kind of vulnerability. She moved toward the signals building. The signals array was her primary objective, not the sentries, not the vehicles, not whatever Breck had decided was worth aborting for. The array was the reason they had come, and inside it was the hardware that contained whatever Kessler had been transmitting for the past 3 months, on frequencies that had been flagged at the intelligence level well above her pay grade, but not well enough above it that she hadn't understood from the way people spoke around her without speaking to her that it mattered enormously. She took 2 more sentries between the fence and the signals building, one with a round and one quietly with the stock of her sidearm in the specific geometry that doesn't leave a man injured so much as rearranged. 3 rounds left, 2 grenades. The signals building door was secured with a standard padlock and a secondary electronic latch that she bypassed with a field kit she kept in the front pouch of her plate carrier, a habit she'd developed after a situation in Kandahar that nobody had debriefed properly. She was inside in 90 seconds. Inside, the array was exactly where the imagery had placed it. A bank of equipment along the north wall, screens dark hard drives indicated by the small orange lights of standby mode. She crossed to the primary terminal and began working. She was 3 minutes into the extraction process, pulling data from the drives onto a field unit about the size of a deck of cards when she heard the radio traffic. It was coming from the adjacent room. Standard encrypted frequency, and she caught enough of it, through the wall, through her limited understanding of the language and her better understanding of tactical radio patterns, to grasp the shape of what was being said. Something about a coalition position, something about a timing window, and then clearly, a set of grid coordinates that she recognized. She recognized them because they were the grid coordinates of Forward Operating Base Lacom, her own base, where Breck and Nyland and the rest of her team were extracting to right now. She stopped pulling data and listened harder. The transmission was a fire order, not a planning call, not a preparation signal. A fire order with a time attached to it. She checked her watch. The time was 63 minutes away. She looked at the field unit in her hand. The extraction was 40% complete. She did the math. She could not finish the extraction and address the fire order in 63 minutes. She had to choose. She did not choose what Breck would have chosen. She pulled the field unit from the drive and pocketed it with what it had. 40% was 40%. Then she moved to the door of the adjacent room and went through it low and fast. 2 operators at a long console. A third man standing behind them, older, with the particular posture of someone who supervises rather than works. He turned when she came in, and his face went through 3 expressions very quickly: surprise, then calculation, then the kind of stillness that belongs to a man who has decided that movement is not his best option. The first operator was unconscious before he completed his turn. The second had better instincts and was halfway out of his chair when she applied the same technique, faster, the specific muscle memory of 1,000 repetitions asserting itself against the background noise of a dislocated shoulder and a bad situation. The supervisor hadn't moved. French, she said. It was a reasonable first guess given the geography. He blinked. Some, he said. His accent placed him considerably further east. Good enough, she said. She crossed to the console without fully turning away from him. Tell me what's on the fire order. He said nothing. I already know the target coordinates, she said. I'm asking about the authorization chain and the asset. Your answer in the next 30 seconds determines how this conversation goes. The supervisor looked at her with the expression of a man performing a rapid reevaluation. Whatever he had expected to find inside his signals room at this hour, it had not been this. Battery Norden, he said finally. Independent unit. Pre-positioned 20 km southeast. The order came down 6 hours ago, but the execution window was held pending confirmation. Pending confirmation of what? Confirmation that your base was undermanned. He paused. The confirmation came 2 hours ago. She sat with that for a moment. The confirmation had come 2 hours ago. Her team had left the compound approximately 3 hours ago. Someone had reported on their extraction. Someone who knew they were leaving, who knew what it meant for the manning level at LACOM. Who provided the confirmation, she said. The supervisor's jaw tightened. That's a different kind of question, she said. She set her hand on the console beside her. You don't have to answer it. But I'd like you to understand that I'm going to find out regardless, and the only variable here is whether you're part of the reason I find it faster or slower. She looked at him directly. Faster is better for the people at that base. Make your decision accordingly. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said one word. She didn't recognize it as a name immediately. Then she did. She kept her face still. She got on the radio. Getting through to Phobie Lacom took 11 minutes. That felt like a different unit of time entirely, something longer and more specific than minutes. The blizzard was interfering. The battery on her radio was at 22%. She burned through 2 frequencies before she found one with enough signal to push a transmission. And the first voice that answered was a duty corporal who had clearly not been briefed on any contingency involving a staff sergeant calling in from inside a hostile signal station with a fire order timeline. She talked him up the chain in 4 minutes. She was not gentle about it. She did not have the patience for gentle. When she finally reached someone with the authority to act, she gave it in sequence: grid of the battery, transmission frequency, execution window in 51 minutes. She gave the coordinates for an airstrike on Battery Norden and the technical justification and the authorization code she had memorized before every mission for the past 3 years. Because her first intelligence instructor had told her that a code you can't remember when you need it is not a code you have. Copy that, the voice said. Sergeant, can you confirm your position? Inside Kessler Signals building, she said. I have partial data extraction and 1 witness. I need an extraction window after the strike package clears. A pause. That's going to be tight. It's going to be what it is, she said. Talk to me in 20 minutes. She signed off and looked at the supervisor. Sit down, she said. He sat. She moved back to the console and began working again. The field unit clicked back into the primary drive. The extraction resumed. 40% became 50. The supervisor watched her from his chair with an expression she had seen before. In men who had encountered her in a situation their previous experience had not prepared them for. Not hostility. Something closer to the recalibration that happens when a category you have been using turns out to be the wrong one. You transmitted our position, he said. Yes, and you're still pulling data. I'm doing both. He was quiet for a moment. Then they told us you were already dead. I know, she said. It was an error in their assessment. He looked at her hands on the console. His expression shifted again. She noted it and kept working. 50%. 60. She heard boots in the corridor outside at the 47-minute mark, and she was already moving before the door opened, crossing to the wall beside the frame with the sidearm in her good hand. Two men came through fast, and she took the first one with the door itself and the second with a strike that she was going to be feeling in the other shoulder for a week. Both down, loud enough that the supervisor flinched, but not loud enough to carry. She went back to the console. 70%. The radio crackled. Strike package confirmed, the duty voice said. You have 22 minutes. Battery Norden is the primary target. What's your extraction vector? East gate, she said. I'll mark it. Do you need additional support at the gate? She thought about the 8 men she'd estimated in the compound when she came in, minus the 4 she'd already addressed, minus the 2 in the corridor. Negative, she said. Just have the bird ready. She didn't entirely believe what she'd just said, but saying it out loud was a way of committing to the version of events where it was true. 80%, she was at 83, when the base alarm went off. Not a soft alert, a full siren, the kind that removed all question about the general situation and replaced it with urgency in every direction at once. Lights came on through the narrow windows. She heard doors, voices, the specific chaos of a facility going from administrative to tactical. She kept her hand on the extraction unit and did not move. This was the part that training was for. Not the shooting, not the navigation, not the data work. This specific moment where every instinct in the body is screaming action and the correct response is stillness. She had trained this more than almost anything else. The instructors at Petawawa had a name for it. They called it the pause. They drilled it until it was automatic, until the pause was as reflexive as the flinch it replaced. She paused. She listened to the chaos organize itself. Voices clustering toward the north end of the compound. Boots converging on the vehicle pool, she thought, or the armory. Not toward the signals building. Not yet. The alarm had been triggered by something she hadn't caused, which meant it was either random or something in the compound had produced its own crisis. Either way, it was working in her favor for approximately the next 4 minutes. 90%. She began preparing the signals, building while the extraction unit ran. Not a destruction, exactly. More of a conversation. She rigged the secondary console to transmit a looping burst on 3 frequencies that the Coalition Intelligence Service had flagged as active enemy communication channels, a burst that contained nothing but noise, but that would spend the next 48 hours drawing attention to this location in ways that would be very inconvenient for whoever tried to reestablish it. 96%. The supervisor was watching her. He had not moved since she told him to sit down. The data you're taking, he said. Yes, she said. Where does it go? To the people who needed it 3 months ago, she said. He looked at the unit in her hand. His expression did something complicated. She noted it and kept working, 100%. She pulled the unit and pocketed it. She looked at the supervisor. Stay in this room for 20 minutes, she said. After 20 minutes, you can do what you want. Before 20 minutes, any sound you make changes the equation in a way that's bad for everyone. He looked at her. He looked at the 2 men on the floor. He nodded once. She went out the window she'd identified as her secondary exit when she came in, dropping 4 feet onto packed gravel and landing on her left side to protect the shoulder. She came up running. The compound was active now, not fully organized, but active. She moved along the interior of the south wall, using the shadows from the vehicle overhang for cover, the alarm siren, providing a sound ceiling that swallowed her footsteps. 3 minutes. She needed 3 minutes to reach the east gate and mark the extraction point and not get shot before the strike package arrived. She was 90 meters from the gate when the fire started. It was coming from the north end of the compound, the armory, she thought, or near it. She hadn't caused it. Whatever had produced the alarm had also apparently produced a fire, and the base garrison was now managing 2 overlapping crises simultaneously, which was 2 more than any garrison managed well. She kept moving. She was 40 meters from the gate when someone stepped out of the shadow of a truck directly into her path. He was large, younger than she expected, and he had his rifle up before she completed the recognition. She was already moving laterally, putting the truck between herself and his line of fire, and she heard the shot go wide and high, and she was behind the vehicle and running along the far side of it before he could reacquire. 2 rounds left, 1 grenade. She could hear him behind her, the specific sound of someone who was trained but hadn't been expecting this specific problem and was working through it in real time. She let him think he was gaining. At the corner of the truck, she stopped. He came around at speed, and she applied the stock of her sidearm to the point that ended the discussion. She used her left arm. Her right shoulder registered its objection through every nerve it still had operational. She filed it, 20 meters to the gate. She covered it in a low sprint that her shoulder would have preferred she describe as something else, pushed through the gate bar, and found a clear patch of ground 20 meters beyond the fence line. She pulled the marking flare from her vest and cracked it and set it down and stepped back. Her radio had 8% battery. She keyed it. Extraction marker is lit. East gate. What's my window? The voice that answered was not the duty corporal. It was someone senior, someone who had clearly been read in since her last transmission. Strike package is 6 minutes out. We have your marker. Stay clear of the compound perimeter. He paused. Sergeant Reeves. Yes, the battery data you transmitted. Logistics confirms the trajectory would have put shells on the main barracks at Lacombe. 400 personnel. She looked at the flare burning in the snow beside her. What's the current manning at Lacombe? Down to 60% after tonight's extraction. He paused again. You understand what that means? She understood what it meant. She had understood it in the signals building, when the supervisor told her the confirmation had come 2 hours ago. When someone had reported on the extraction numbers. When someone who knew the base would be thin had sent that information somewhere it could be used. Who provided the confirmation? She said. We're looking at that, he said. She knew what we're looking at meant. She had been on the receiving end of we're looking at it before, in a different context. For different reasons. We're looking at it meant they had a shape without a name, a signal without a source, a pattern without an admission. She had something they didn't. She had a name from the supervisor, one word. She kept it. The strike package arrived 4 minutes and 40 seconds later. At that distance, in the dark, with the blizzard between her and Battery Norden 20 kilometers southeast, she didn't see it so much as feel it. A pressure event, a change in the way the air was organized, then a light on the horizon that had no business being where it was, orange and certain and final. Battery Norden would not be firing that morning. 400 people at FOB Lacombe were going home to their families, without knowing how close the arithmetic had come to producing a different answer. She stood in the snow next to her flare and let that land. The helicopter took 9 minutes. The medic who came off the bird first was a young master corporal named Villeneuve, who took one look at her shoulder and made a sound that wasn't a word. She knew the sound. I know, she said. Just get me on the bird. He got her on the bird. The flight to the field hospital at FOB Whitmore took 18 minutes. She was conscious for all of it, which she later decided was both a function of her constitution and a specific kind of penance. Because conscious meant she had nothing to do except feel the accumulated weight of the previous 5 hours settle onto her all at once. The adrenaline was gone. The math was gone. The narrow focused tunnel of objective and next step had closed. And what was left was just Dana Reeves in a helicopter with a dislocated shoulder and a field unit in her vest pocket and the slow, enormous private recognition that she had not known she was going to survive this until approximately 30 minutes ago. That was a thing she kept to herself. Villeneuve talked to her the way medics talk to patients they're concerned about losing. He asked her name. She told him her unit. She told him what had happened. She said long night, and he exhaled something that was almost a laugh and said, "Ma'am, I have been in this job for 3 years, and I have never picked someone up from inside a hostile compound before." And she almost smiled. Almost. The field hospital at FOB Whitmore was controlled chaos at 0440 hours. Controlled chaos was its natural state. She registered faces without fully absorbing them. A surgeon she didn't know. 2 nurses moving with the economy of people who had learned to think 3 steps ahead. A captain from the intelligence section who was standing at the edge of the medical cluster with the particular expression of a man who wanted a conversation she was not currently available for. She lost some time after that. Not sleep exactly, but the dim space between full awareness and it, where things occur in your vicinity without fully connecting. She heard words. Shoulder, the surgeon said, and she noted the plural before she stopped tracking. Exposure, blood loss, secondary lacerations. The inventory of a body that had been used past its posted limits. She woke fully at 10:30 hours. She knew the time because the first thing she did was look for a clock. The second thing was try to sit up and discover that her right arm was in a sling tight enough to qualify as architectural, and her hands felt like they belonged to someone who had been outside in -12 for several hours, which was accurate. "Don't," said a voice. She looked left. Lieutenant Colonel Ann Garrity, Base Commander, Joint Special Operations, was sitting in a chair beside her bed with a coffee cup and the expression of a person who had been waiting long enough to develop opinions about it. "Ma'am," Reeves said. "Sergeant Reeves." Garrity's voice was level in a way that could mean several things. Reeves had learned early in her career that level voices from senior officers required more data before interpretation. Garrity set her coffee down. "How are you feeling?" "Functional," Reeves said. "Your surgeon used the word remarkable twice in his report. I believe he was referring to your continued existence rather than your functional status." "I'll take remarkable," Reeves said. Garrity looked at her for a moment. "Do you know what happened between 0200 and 0400 this morning at FOB Lacombe?" Reeves waited. "Nothing," Garrity said, which is the most significant nothing in this theater in 4 months. Because what was scheduled to happen, what was 47 minutes from happening, was an artillery strike on the main barracks, full capacity. She paused. 400 personnel. 400. Reeves had known the number in a general sense. Hearing it said out loud was different. "The field unit you recovered," Garrity continued. "Our intelligence team has been working on it since 0530. You told the duty officer it was 40% of the intended extraction." "Yes," Reeves said. Garrity leaned forward slightly. 40% was enough. What you pulled out of that signals building isn't just operational data for Kessler. It's a transmission log, 14 months of traffic, contact frequencies, timing patterns, source identifiers." She paused. "Our people are saying it's the most significant single intelligence capture in this operational theater this calendar year." She let that settle. "You extracted it from a hostile signals station with a dislocated shoulder after your unit left you in a drainage ditch." Reeves said nothing. "I need to ask you something," Garrity said. Her voice shifted in the way a conversation shifts when it stops being preliminary. "The duty officer's log shows your first transmission came in at 0251. Your unit's extraction was logged at 0148. That's 63 minutes. Reeves met her eyes. "What happened in that 63 minutes?" So Reeves told her, clean and factual, the operational sequence the way she'd been trained to report it. Position assessment, decision, movement, entry, actions on objective. She talked for 9 minutes. Garrity listened without interrupting once. When Reeves finished, the room was quiet. Then Garrity said Lieutenant Breck filed his after-action report at 0730. Something in Reeves's chest went still. "He reported you as killed in action." Garrity's voice was careful. "Grenade blast confirmed by visual at time of incident." "He reported that extraction conditions were non-survivable and that the decision to leave without physical confirmation of your status was a command judgment call within his authority." She paused. "He also reported that the mission failed, that the team extracted before completing the reconnaissance objective due to hostile pressure and deteriorating conditions." "He didn't know you'd completed it," Reeves said. "He didn't know about the field unit. He didn't know about the fire order or the battery coordinates or the transmission you made on the coalition frequency or the fact that you were inside Kessler signal station while he was writing the word failed in his after-action report." Garrity's voice was steady. "How do you feel about that?" It was a question Reeves hadn't been asked in a long time. Not like that. Direct, offered without a prescribed answer, waiting genuinely for what she had to say. She thought about it. "I feel like the mission is what matters," she said. "I feel like 400 people at Lacombe are alive and the battery is gone, and the intelligence team has 14 months of traffic on a unit that's been operating without us knowing its full scope." She paused. "I feel like what Breck filed is a separate issue from what actually happened." Garrity looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very professional answer," she said. "It's the true one." "It's both," Garrity said, "which is rarer than it should be." She picked up her coffee. "There's going to be an investigation. What Breck filed contradicts the physical evidence, and his own team's accounts are already inconsistent." She stood. "Get some rest, Sergeant." Not a suggestion. At the door she stopped. "There's something else," she said. She didn't turn around. "The ambush that put your unit behind the perimeter in the first place. Your patrol route was filed 40 hours before the mission on the standard operational timeline. We have reason to believe it was accessed by someone with authorization who is not on your team." Reeves felt the stillness come over her, the pre-decision stillness, the world narrowing to a point. "Someone leaked the route," she said. "We believe so. From inside the base. We believe so." She looked at her hands in the sling, the ambush, the drainage ditch, the sound of Breck saying "then we extract," and the sound of her team moving away through the dark. All of it had begun, she had understood, as a mission that went wrong. Missions went wrong. That was part of the framework. You trained for missions going wrong. You accepted that the training might not be enough, and you went anyway because that was the job. But a mission that went wrong because someone had transmitted the route, that was a decision. Someone had made a decision, and the consequence was a drainage ditch and a dislocated shoulder and 63 minutes of being dead on the books while she was still breathing. Who? She said. We're working on candidates, Garrity said. She paused. The transmission log you recovered includes a signal on a frequency we use internally, originating from inside this base's communication radius, 40 hours before your mission. The same frequency. Reeves said it before she'd finished processing it. We're verifying. But yes, we believe the person who transmitted your patrol route and the person whose communication signature appears in 14 months of Kessler's traffic are the same person. I want to be part of the investigation, Reeves said. You will be, Garrity said, when your surgeon clears you, which is not today. She left. Reeves lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling. She thought about the supervisor in the signals building, the single word he had given her. She had kept it. She had not transmitted it on the radio, had not given it to the duty officer, had not included it in anything that could be intercepted or overheard or accessed by someone with authorization who should not have it. She was going to give it to Garrity directly, in a room with no radio equipment, in 3 days when she could walk there herself. 3 days. She found her call button and pressed it. When the nurse appeared in the doorway, she said, I need to speak to my surgeon. I need to know exactly what I need to do to be mobile in 72 hours. The nurse looked at her shoulder, then at her face, and did the calculation that most people eventually did when they spent time around Reeves, the one where you weighed what you were seeing against what you were hearing and decided which was the more accurate description of who this person actually was. I'll get him, she said. Day 3, 08:30 hours, Fob Whitmore. The surgeon was Captain Lindquist, and he had the particular energy of a man who had been presented with an unreasonable clinical request and had spent 72 hours discovering that the word unreasonable was doing more work than he'd originally assigned it. He stood at the foot of her bed with her chart and the expression of someone revising a prior professional opinion. Your healing indicators are unusual, he said. He said it the way a scientist says something unusual, as information rather than judgment. The shoulder has stabilized ahead of where I projected it at this stage. Does that mean I can walk on my own? It means, he said carefully, that with the sling, with someone beside you, with the explicit understanding that you are not cleared for anything I would describe using the words physical activity, you can walk from here to the base commander's office. He looked at her. I need to understand that that's actually where you're going. It is, she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. If I find out otherwise, he said, we're going to have a very uncomfortable conversation about your recovery timeline. Understood, she said. He left. She was already reaching for her boots with her left hand before the door finished closing. Garrity's office was on the second floor of the operations building. Reeves walked there with a sling and a pace that suggested she knew exactly where she was going, which she did. The corporal at the outer desk looked up at her and started to say something and then didn't, which was a response she'd been getting since she was a young private and had learned to accept as a kind of compliment. Garrity was behind her desk. Captain Svensson from intelligence was there, the same man who had been hovering at the edge of the medical cluster 3 days ago, with the expression of a man who wanted a conversation. There was a third person in the room that Reeves had not anticipated. Colonel James Thurlow, Regional Operations Commander, a man whose name she knew from the chain of command that existed above her daily operational life, the way weather existed. Present and consequential and usually abstract. He was not abstract right now. He was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who had read a file thoroughly and was comparing it to the person. Sergeant Reeves, he said. Sir, sit down. He said it the way senior commanders say sit down, which made it an instruction that accommodated no interpretation as an invitation. She sat. Thurlow put his hands flat on the desk. I've read the full corrected after action, he said. The intelligence assessment of the transmission log, the investigation findings. He looked at her. I've also read your complete personnel file going back to your first deployment. He paused. Your first deployment commanding officer wrote, and I'm quoting directly, Sergeant Reeves demonstrates a quality of tactical decision-making under deteriorating conditions that I have not observed at this experience level in this context. She should be considered for specialized reconnaissance tasking within 12 months. He set the page down. That was 6 years ago. You were not given the tasking. Reeves said nothing. Do you know why? I have a theory, she said. So do I, Thurlow said. And the investigation findings support it. He looked at Svensson. Svensson opened the folder in front of him and turned it to face her. On the left side was a network map, the kind that intelligence analysis produced, nodes and connection lines. On the right side was a printed signals log with certain lines highlighted in yellow. The transmission log from the field unit, Svensson said, 14 months of traffic, 4 active nodes. He pointed to one node. This signature appears twice. Once 13 months ago when the network was being established, once 40 hours before your mission was ambushed. He paused. We believe it's the same source, the same person who helped build the network and who transmitted the patrol route, Reeves said. Svensson nodded. Do you have a name? He looked at her for a moment, the professional hesitation of a man deciding how much to give before he'd confirmed she was ready for it. She looked back at him steadily. She had been receiving that hesitation from men in rooms like this one for 8 years. The pause that preceded important information, as though the information needed to be introduced slowly, as though she required a buffer between herself and the full truth. She had never required a buffer. Tell me, she said. He turned the folder over. On the back cover, in block letters, on a piece of paper that had been taped there by hand, was a name. Old method, nothing digital. She read it. She sat with it. She had served alongside this person, had eaten in the same mess, had attended the same briefings, had in a specific and limited way that military service produces without guaranteeing, trusted this person with things that required trust. She had believed this person was oriented toward the same objective she was. She had been wrong. She read the name again. The investigation is 4 days old, Svensson said. We had circumstantial evidence before the field unit. Now we have signals confirmation. We move when we have physical corroboration. We expect that within the next 48 hours. Does Breck know? She said. Svensson's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Breck is being interviewed as a witness. His interview began this morning. We're treating everyone on your former team as a witness at this stage. I want to be in the room when you move, she said. Reeves, I'm not asking to conduct the arrest, she said. I'm asking to be present when you make the move. She looked at him directly. I think I've earned that. Svensson looked at her, at the sling, at her face, at the face of a person who had been left for dead 4 days ago, and was sitting in a base commander's office discussing the timeline of a counterintelligence operation with the same quality of focus she had used to work through a hostile compound in the dark. He took the piece of paper off the back of the folder, folded it twice, and set it on the desk in front of her. 48 hours, he said. If Lindqvist clears you for mobility, you're in the room. After Svensson and Thurlow left, Garrity stayed. She was quiet for a moment, which Reeves recognized as a deliberate choice. The choice to be present without filling the space. It was harder than it looked and rarer than it should have been. You okay? Garrity said finally. Working on it. Fair answer. There was a window on the east wall of the office. Through it, Reeves could see the base in its morning operation, vehicles moving, people crossing between buildings. The ordinary texture of a place that did not know how close 4 days ago had come to being something that would have ended entirely differently. Garrity set her coffee down. Thurlow has authorized a task element, she said. Reeves looked at her. Small unit. Specialized reconnaissance and direct action against the remaining network nodes on the transmission log. You built the intelligence foundation for this. He wants you to finish it. She slid a folder across the desk. The task element designation is in there. So is the team lead slot. She paused. Your name is in the team lead line. Reeves looked at the folder. She did not open it immediately. She thought about every room she had walked into, where the opening assumption was that she was in the wrong room. Every qualification score that had been checked twice, every recommendation that had been filed and quietly lost. Every moment of being told, in language ranging from direct to architectural, that the position she was trying to occupy was not built for someone like her. She thought about a drainage ditch in the dark, and a voice saying, then we extract, and the decision she had made in the silence. After the sound of boots faded, not the decision to survive, but the decision to complete the objective, not because anyone was watching, but because the mission was the mission, and she was the only one left to run it. She opened the folder, task element, 6 billets. Team lead line with her name typed in standard military font, orderly and unremarkable and entirely extraordinary. Yes, she said. clean and final, the way she made every decision that actually mattered. Garrity nodded once. She picked up her coffee. The window outside framed a sky that was clearing for the first time in 4 days, the storm having exhausted itself somewhere in the night. Reeves picked up the folder and stood. 48 hours until the arrest. Then the network, the 4 remaining nodes on Svensson's map. The thread she had pulled from a burning signal station, 40% of the intended extraction, enough, it had turned out, to do what she needed to do. She would follow that thread wherever it went. She walked out of the office under her own power. No one who saw her in the corridor that morning, moving with purpose, the arm in the sling, the only visible evidence of everything the previous 4 days had contained, would have known what she was carrying. The weight of 400 lives, the shape of a network that needed to come apart, the name on a folded piece of paper in her vest pocket, the memory of a drainage ditch and a team that walked away. They would have just seen a soldier who knew exactly where she was going. Staff Sergeant Dana Reeves, call sign Stillwater, had been left for dead in the dark behind enemy lines. She had disabled a fire order that would have killed 400 people, extracted 14 months of intelligence that was already rewriting what the coalition understood about the network it had been chasing, exposed the person who had built that network from the inside, and walked out of a field hospital on her own terms. The drainage ditch had not finished her. Nothing had. And now, with a task element folder in her left hand and 5 network nodes still on the map and 6 billets waiting to be filled by the best unit she would ever lead, she was a long way from done.